Hello, good morning, and welcome to our final presentation. We decided to choose measuring the willingness to pay for climate change mitigation. This is a very concerning topic for most of the population, as the alteration of global climate change patterns is resulted to be a worldwide phenomenon. Thus, data collection is the outcome of an internet survey sponsored by the German government. The survey is divided into various question formats. Firstly, we have the detrosumous choice, DC referendum. Secondly, the dissonance minimizing DM referendum. And finally, the two-side payment ladder. The DM referendum gives further categories to the standard DC referendum, which permit the respondent to communicate in favor of the referendum without consenting to pay the set price, while the two-side payment ladder offers the participant to respond to the willingness to pay in given intervals. The ultimate goal with this approach is to observe the determination to fee for climate change mitigation. Additionally, throughout this topic, there are four main learning objectives, and these are to construct index to measure attitudes or opinion, to fully understand and make use of Cronbach in order to assess internal consistency. Furthermore, we will practice recording and creating new variables, and finally, we will compare the survey's measures of willingness to pay.
As a consequence, the research question would then be, how could it be calculated the value people give to reducing environmental damage against the cost of actually implementing any abatement?
Throughout this survey, we can spot various limitations when addressing the evaluation. Firstly, we have to highlight that we have detected low response rates in many of the questions. This could affect the reliability. As a result, will be made without all the data available. Another challenge we may face is that there are various question formats employed. The ways of responding to them could result in a bias and so distort the willingness to pay and willingness to accept estimate, as various categories are being used. Furthermore, there may be more respondents from one category than from another one. The group age could also be a challenge, as younger ages will be much more difficult to approach and so have fewer responses. As pointed out in section 5, CV respondents may have 4 different biases. In this case, due to different categories, there may be a wrong use of X scenarios that have a strong incentive to prompt respondents to depend on X scenario willingness to pay. Finally, we should not forget the fact that this survey has been conducted in Germany. It would only be reliable there, as behavior changes vastly throughout countries and continents, and also, even when comparing developed countries, their social, economic, and political structure will differ.
By comparing the people assigned to each question format and observing also their demographic characteristics as well as their attitudes towards the topic, some really interesting data came out. So first of all, in the latter group, there were only 504 participants, while the ref group had almost a double of size, which was 1,006 people participating. So this huge difference in participants could be noticed also in the other categories, such as age, where, for example, in the age range between 50 and 59 years old, the latter group had 121 people in that age range, and in the ref group, 240, so the double size. Also, we saw that in both groups there were more females participating than males. And finally, when analyzing their occupational situation, most options were very similar in numbers, but the full-time employed option was higher in the ref group, where there were 410 people, and in the latter group only 186. So the next part was just about recoding and creating new variables. We needed to recreate and recode variables that were in a scale from 1 to 5 in the survey, and change the 1 for a 5, the 2 for a 4, and so on. And so we used the function VLOOKUP, and afterwards we used the same to create the new variables VTP, PLmin, and VTP PLmax. So after recoding and creating the new variables, we were able to find the mean of these different attitudes. So first, the belief that climate change is real, the mean was 2.3. the preference is that the government intervenes to solve the problems in society was 3.0, and the feeling that personal responsibility to act pro-environmentally was 2.78. Okay, so for the next exercise, we needed to do like a summarized table for different variables. Some of them we already talked about them when we saw the demographics, and some others were, for example, the children. So in both groups, the most selected option was no children. And in the household net income was one of the categories where we really could see a difference, because the participants in the ref group earn more money than in the latter group. Also in members, the percentage was exactly the same. So most people had not a membership in an environmental organization. 92% said no and 8% said yes. And finally, in education, in general, we could say that the majority in one group and in the other group had some kind of higher education.
It was asked to study the coefficient correlation from Cronbach's alpha from items of 3 different categories, which are climate change skepticism, government intervention, and personal responsibility. So first, I'm going to explain how to interpret the results from each measurement. For the correlation coefficient, it goes from -1 to 1. When it's closer to -1, means that the relationship is more negative, and when it gets closer to +1, it's a positive relationship. Although when it's closer to 0 means that there is no relationship. The Cronbach's alpha was calculated via SPSS, and it is considered to have a strongly reliability when it's higher than 0.7. And as we can see our results in the blue square, the first one is really close to 0.7, although the other two are higher than that, which means that overall it has a really high strongly reliability. For the correlation of coefficient, we have the graphs for each category. As you can see, all of them are in the positive area, although one show better results than others. For example, in the first one, we can see that it's really close to 0, although it is also moderate. In the government intervention, it is really close to 0, being in some cases being in 0, which means that it has a really weak relationship. And in personal responsibility, show the strongest relationship, as all of them are closer to 0.5 or higher.
Okay, so for the last exercise of this section 1, we needed to do summary tables showing the mean, the standard deviation, and the minimum maximum. So before just saying all the numbers, it's important to know that the standard deviation were in the 3 categories: climate change belief, intervention of the government, and personal responsibility to take action. In the 3, they were 1.1, and the minimum and maximum didn't change either. They were always 1 and 5. So the mean in the climate change belief was in the latter 2.3 and in the ref 2.4. Then in the intervention of the government, both means were 3.2. And in the personal responsibility to take action, both means were 3. So as we can see, the difference between one group and another was very, very, very small.
Moving on to our section 2, question 1, we were asked to do 2 graphs, one for frequency versus minimum WTP and the other one for frequency versus maximum WTP. After gathering the results, we were able to find out that these 2 distributions show a more of a lefty-heavy, meaning which there exists a higher number of low values. Looking at the first graph, the one on the left, frequency versus minimum WTP, we can see that 48 has the highest minimum amount and 1,440 has the lowest minimum amount. 48 is repeated 156 times in comparison to the rest of the numbers. On the other hand, by looking at the second graph to the right, it can be seen that the highest maximum amount is 108, which is repeated 52 times, and the lowest maximum amount, 48, which is repeated 8 times. Furthermore, we gathered two main important values based from the average WTP from the minimum and the maximum. The median gave us 268.53 and the mean was 132. The average WTP between the minimum and the maximum were taken from each value. The highest average was of 1,440 and the lowest average was of 48. A total of 348 values were manipulated in order to obtain the required average for each row. Furthermore, by looking at this chart on the right, it may be understood that the correlation coefficients are very low than usual, which may suggest that the average WTP isn't that strongly correlated towards the variables of education, gender, belief, preferences, and feelings.
The second part from this section includes the results obtained from the group for questions with DC format. They needed to respond with their willingness to pay or not to pay. There was also a third option for people who just wouldn't participate in the referendum for climate change. Individuals' willingness was analyzed through a specific amount of cost for the reduction of environmental damage. Second option was no pay, and the third was no participating in the referendum, as the different columns show. The result for the amount of people who indicated yes were more than 383 people, but all these depending on different costs. Next, the frequency of people who responded do not support the referendum and no pay were more, reaching 456 of frequency. Finally, for the third option, for the people who wouldn't vote, they were more than 165. Some of the coasts were more popular, meaning it would be a coast, meaning some coasts where people there were costs where people were more willing to make a change for the environment, like for example, 82 euros. Next, the results changed when considering only two options. First, the percentage of the amount of people who confirmed they would vote and pay changed depending on costs. The highest results were for 84 euros per year. The percentage of individuals was more than 50%. The other option in column was for the people who voted for no, plus the people who did not participate in the referendum, included in the results. Comparing answers with higher cost was a clear and real differences. Higher amounts, like 720 euros per year, showed higher percentage of individuals who wouldn't participate or voted. This reached almost 65% of the results. Moving on, a scatter plot was created in order to show the frequencies only for the individual who were willing to pay, comparing it with different costs. This is the first graph showed in the slide in the left. The curve, as shown, tends to be high, but it starts decreasing as the other variable, which is cost, increases. Thus, as a consequence, there is a negative correlation in DC format for the cost and willingness to pay. Another scatter plot, which is in the right, was formed with the results for the curve shown above with the people that are willing to pay. But this time, another curve was added. The new calculations exclude individuals who chose abstain as an answer. As shown in the graph, this is the red line. The results differ in terms that the degrees is lower, and at the same time, the willingness is higher.
The table presented shows a summary for the willingness to pay from each type of data collection, which are DC and TWPL. As you can see, there's a significant difference in means, and also the number for DC is higher than TWPL. This means that the difference is not due to chance. Moreover, as the confidence interval is far away from zero, the conclusion is likely to not present a difference, even if the models we use are others.
The median is a measurement that helps this study for understanding how willingness among formats vary. In the results, it is observed that medians among both formats are similar. For the first group, DC is 192, which is the middle number of total observations from this variable. For the other format, TWPL is 132. These numbers are close, whereas when comparing the mean in the DC format is almost twice the number for TWPL format.
It is recommended that instead of using the mean WTP, the median should be used. WTP median is lower than what is supposed in order to complete the required migration activities. Governments could create campaigns that keep the audience informed of what is going on and creates awareness and incentivizes people for the cause. Like many NGOs or other organizations, they have tried to implement documentaries, campaigns, or even competitions in order to raise awareness about the importance of the environment in our lives, and also for people to understand the impact that humans have on the environment.